Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, August 25th, 2025. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary, back from a week off during which we did non-newsy podcasts, and we got emails all week about where were you? I needed you to explain to me what's going on because everything is so confusing. And I have to confess that I was actually pleased to be off last week because I was so confused about everything, particularly what was going on with Russia and Ukraine and the Europeans and the prime ministers and the meetings and the back and forth stories and the behavior of Sergei Lavrov and people wearing CCCP sweatshirts to summits, and that I was happy not to have to do a daily analysis of what has turned out to be something pretty close to a big nothing burger. At least it seems at this moment that nothing has changed, and that the Europeans recommitted themselves to an all-for-one, one-for-all stand on Ukraine. We don't quite know where we are. The Russians are clearly not going to play ball, and the Ukrainians are hewing close to Russia. And so that's all we're going to say about this matter until we get some actual news. And by we, I mean executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Connolly. Hey, Matt. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Hey, Matt. Hey, hi.
Hey, hi.
And social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John. I will say people should go read the interview the Wall Street Journal did over the weekend with the historian Stephen Kotkin about Russia, Ukraine. Fascinating. Good background to future discussion.
So I hope you all had a good week off, and now we got to get back into it and talk about Cracker Barrel. Okay, no, we'll talk about Cracker Barrel later, but it is a very interesting and telling thing that you don't know how the news works. So we've had like 6, 7, 8 months of very important news, right? Doge, campus anti-Semitism, fights over, the strike on Iran, all of that. When you get something that happens that seems to be something that everybody in America is perfectly legitimately entitled to an opinion of, where you don't need anything but your own 5 senses to express your view of, like, is this a good new logo for Cracker Barrel? And what does it mean that they redesigned the logo for Cracker Barrel? And what does it mean that they redesigned the dining room of Cracker Barrel? You can feel the world shift in a weird way because people are like, well, I don't even know where Gaza is, but I know where Cracker Barrel is. It's right off 95. And every hour there's another Cracker Barrel. And I've been to Cracker Barrel 500 times. And let me tell you, I'm going to express my opinion of Cracker Barrel. And then everybody in the internet world of influencers and speakers and click mongers and clickbaiters and all of that, it instantly gets the memo that it's time to like jump on this because people are really interested in what Cracker Barrel looks like and what the meta meaning might be of a redesign of Cracker Barrel. So I would say that was actually the biggest news of last week in some really bizarre way, at least for news consumers.
It's similar to the Sydney Sweeney controversy of earlier in the summer. We've had a few of these stories.
We always do. That's the point.
Yeah.
We want to talk about substantive matters. The world...
Do we?
We don't.
I'd much rather talk about Cracker Barrel. First of all, I have not seen the new logo in actuality. I drove by several Cracker Barrels in the past 72 hours, and the old man's still there with his barrel. So this woke revolution, maybe there's a chance to prevent it.
I think that's entirely possible that this is a new Coke moment where, what they'll do is they'll do a thing where they'll like have, in certain places, we will have the new logo, but where people really seem to love the old logo, we'll just have the old logo. And
but
can I just say one thing about Cracker Barrel? Yeah, go ahead.
No,
I was just going to say this. The dining rooms of Cracker Barrels are very grubby looking. I don't care. I love Cracker Barrel and I love the store and I love stopping there on 95 to go. And I like the succotash. And, my dad loved the pancakes. It would put disgusting like cherry and strawberry compote on top of the pancakes. And I'm very fond of Cracker Barrel, but the dining rooms needed something. Like they did look like
Okay, I'm going to go all in
prison
on
dining
defending.
rooms.
I'm going to defend the dining room, and this is why. Because I've spent many hours in Cracker Barrels because I would drive up to Maine every summer with very young children, beginning when they were a year old. And Cracker Barrel's dining rooms are brilliant if you're there with young children. There is so much stuff for them to just sit and look at while you take a breather, enjoy a breakfast. They love it. And then the other half of the Cracker Barrel is a weird shop with, of course, tons of candy, gigantic lollipops, all kinds of tchotchkes. And so in that sense, it's the perfect place if you just need a break, you don't want to go to a fast food restaurant. And this is where the aesthetic revolution that this new CEO is trying to impose on Cracker Barrel is so wrongheaded. She's trying to make them all look like very bureaucratic. The new McDonald's, for example, which just looks like a corporate office. It's so dull and so tedious. And yes, the schlocky McDonald's with the play space of my youth was kind of hideous in a way, but it was also very real. It just felt like a real place. And there was some quirk to it. And so even though Cracker Barrel is sort of industrialized quirkiness, at least it tried to be quirky. And I found it very useful for as a place to stop on a long trip with kids because they were fascinated by all the crap on the walls.
Well, did it say that they were getting rid of the pegboard game on the table? I didn't see that they said they were getting rid of the pegboard game.
No, I don't know if
table
they'll get rid of the pegboard, but I'm just talking about the stuff that's all over the walls, all the old tools and the cooking implements and just all that stuff. That
the
kids
flair.
Look at. Yes, the flair. Thank you.
But I have a question with it because I don't know. By the way, I've never been to a Cracker Barrel.
Abe.
Never been. But it's not a policy. I'd go. I just haven't been. What's woke about the new logo? This is what I don't understand. I've read a few.
It's an old white man.
Yeah.
Rural. It's a rural old white man.
Yeah.
And the image of the Cracker Barrel is a small town. The Cracker Barrel was something that existed outside a general store where they would literally put dry goods like crackers in the barrel to keep them from going stale. And then you would go into the Cracker Barrel in some general store in some small town with a bag, and you would take crackers and put them in the bag and then bring crackers home with you. And so this evokes small town white America. So if you remove the old guy next to the Cracker Barrel, you are saying this is no longer the image of America that we are trying to evoke in you that would make you say, oh, I really want to stop there because it's like home to me.
It's the difference between somewheres and anywheres. The old logo was somewhere. It was situated. Right. The new logo could be anywhere. It's free of any kind of particularity.
I see. I think this is a sort of, we're stretching the definition of woke here.
You think?
I really do. Well, is that the consent? I don't know.
This is an important point because this is how the cultural discussion now always falls into, is it woke or is it anti-woke? When in this case, this isn't actually about wokeness at all.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I don't think it is about wokeness. I think that is being overlaid onto what is a broader aesthetic challenge that all of these chain restaurants are facing in an economy where they're trying to draw in people who otherwise wouldn't go there.
There were plenty of liberal critics of the logo change as well, weren't there? I think Laura Coates of CNN actually led her show with an anti-Cracker Barrel monologue. She's definitely not on the right. So if anything, there was a brief moment of consensus that this was a wrong-headed move. And that's why the national implications of the story, as John pointed out, are so riveting because everyone has an opinion and both sides can come together.
I would defend very slightly the wokeness criticism, and this is to say that there was a bit of a kerfuffle on social media between Chris Rufo and Jonah Goldberg, in which Jonah Goldberg made fun of the Cracker Barrel fight, and Chris Rufo's like, no. Or Chris Rufo did this first. He said, I've looked into this, and the PR department of Cracker Barrel has, over the last couple of years, put out some wokey statements about welcoming diversity and like with a pride flag in some ad on Pride Day and that sort of thing. And so you're saying this is a necessary component or the completion of corporate wokeness, which is imposed internally with morons like a CEO who doesn't know where things are, let's say, or doesn't understand what's being sort of like propagandized to him, not understanding that the thing that impelled the idea of the change was this is old fashioned, and then translate old fashioned into American, patriotic. It's the place you go where you can buy a bingo board that has American flags on it or stuff like that. And we're trying to freshen it up to remove the stain of small town Americana, which now has a terrible valence. That was sort of Rufo's meta point. Jonah's meta point, like all of ours now, is like, oh, for God's sake, can we just have 5 minutes in which everything is not the culture war?
Yeah.
But everything isn't necessarily the culture war, as Laura Coates's sort of innate hostility to this also proves an innate conservatism in the American soul, which is like, don't change things just to change things. What's the matter with you? That was actually what happened with old Coke and new Coke 40 years ago. That was so fascinating when it happened. Coke said, we did 1 million taste tests and we had 1 million focus groups and people like this Coke better. And we're changing it because they like it better. And therefore we will sell more Coke. And then everybody said, no, we like
ironically,
old
Mexican Coke is the best Coke. So I just throwing that out there.
But it's like, we like old Coke. Don't give us, I don't care what your marketing said. You don't change, like America's, what would you call it? Secular sacramental wine recipe.
But
What's the matter with you?
So many brands and chains simplify their logo or their name over time. I mean, they sort of streamline it, right? Like Dunkin' Donuts, Kentucky Fried Chicken became KFC and whatever. I mean, this
because
is
they're
just
all stupid. This is ultimately the point, though, which is they think, and I think it's a new CEO, so the new CEO wants to,
put his mark on
the new
things.
CEO wants to make his mark. CEOs want to change things. This is what's been going on in Hollywood for 10 years. Like the world's worst mergers, AT&T and Warner Brothers, and then Discovery and Paramount. All that stuff is about, I'm going to come in and you're going to make all these changes because that's why I'm here. I bought it. I want to change it. And it's like, why are you changing it? What's the matter with you? If it's not broke, don't fix it. And people like what they have.
Well, there's another. The CEO of Cracker Barrel is a woman, and there's a branding. I think to get back to the Rufo everything is woke argument, which I'm on Jonah's side of that one. I have to admit, she also kind of she walks and talks like the CEO of NPR. There's a kind of liberal white woman trigger that happens to people like Rufo whenever a CEO like her comes out and says we're rebranding. It's instant, and it's not always incorrect that they're not driven by kind of crazy identity politics. But I think conservatives and the right in general should really be cautious about mission creeping too much with the culture war. We've made a lot of gains recently, and those should be celebrated. But there are true institutional battles to be had, and I'm not sure, boycotting Cracker Barrel, which, by the way, when you go into a Cracker Barrel, at least along the East Coast, anywhere on the East Coast, it is an incredibly diverse group of people sitting down to eat. It just is.
Totally.
Like, you're not going to find, it's not all white by any stretch of the imagination.
I think, Rufo would look at it differently, which is that mission creep is a good thing. So that you pick your fight. This is not the trans Dylan. What was it, Dylan Mulvaney?
Mulvaney.
Yeah, the
Bud Light
trans Bud Light spokesman, right? So this is instead they're just dropping the white guy, and they're redesigning the dining room to make it less, again, like I say, less Americana-y. It seemed much more commercialized and homogenized in the pictures I saw. Well, this means that actually the Dylan Mulvaney fight was pocketed. We won. So now let's fight over this and see if you can stop them from removing the barrel from the logo. And if you can win that fight, well, great. Then there's something else. I've listened. I'm halfway through this. I do this for research purposes. Extremely long podcast that ISI put out with 4 thinkers of the new right: Patrick Deneen, Christopher Caldwell, Curtis Yarvin, who's something else, and Chris Rufo. And in fact, Rufo makes the version of the point that I just made in regard to DeSantis in Florida, and about how, everyone thought that when DeSantis took on Disney, oh my God, this is going too far. What, you're going up against this extremely powerful, beloved corporation. And not only did DeSantis continue with the fight, well, he won the fight. And so the way that the people on the new right think about these things is, you keep going and see. And so if you can get Cracker Barrel to back down off of this, great. Let's move on ahead.
But this is the one error of the new right, though, is that they forget that even people who are sympathetic to their arguments don't want to fight over every single thing. And there's an exhaustion that comes from having everything become a pitched battle in which you must choose sides. Like, now I have to boycott Cracker Barrel because they're woke. So it's a tension. It's always been a tension with a more radical push to change the culture. But I would caution them that they should start to choose their battles wisely, because I certainly find some of this stuff a little excessive and people turn it off. They stop listening after a while.
Okay, so to play devil's advocate here, what is interesting is when the liberal culture, we could call it the woke culture if you wanted, but comes for institutions with which conservatives, broadly speaking, identify. And there is great upset. In other words, you can have Benetton. You can have Apple, if you want Apple. You can have Silicon Valley. Like, okay, this is who you are. But you can't have the NFL. You can't have Disney World. And you can't have Cracker Barrel. These are institutions that we like, that we think evoke a kind of American fantasy that we want our kids to enjoy as well, right? Main Street USA, Disney, Cracker Barrel's image of the small town with the rocking chairs in the front of the, that you can buy and bring home in your car, and all the fun stuff and all the toys in the store that evoke Trump voting. And then the NFL, I think it was the going at the NFL, Black Lives Mattering the NFL, sort of letting Colin Kaepernick win after losing, all of that stuff. It was like, we get no space in this culture. You are invading our space. We have already ceded Hollywood to you. Give us our Cracker Barrel. We didn't come at you and say, and Bud Light, another very, what is the Budweiser Corporation's advertising? What has it been for the last 50 years? It's pure Americana. Horses, lip is on, like horses riding in the American Midwest. It's beer, it's early morning on the farm. That stuff, that is the image that Budweiser has promulgated or kept going for my entire lifetime. And then they turn around. Oh, and sports play, right? Bud Light was made by ads featuring like drunken, crazy sports figures, Billy Martin and people like that having temper tantrums on screen, and Rodney Dangerfield and all this. This is not, a trans guy drinking a beer. And it's like, we get our beer, we get Budweiser, we get Disney, why are you doing this to us? And interestingly, speaking of Disney, there was a story last week, I think in Variety, about how Disney now recognizes that it has a huge problem with boys, and that boys are no longer interested in having anything to do with Disney. And they need to do something to attract boys, because they have spent 20 years focusing on girls. Now, why did they focus on girls to begin with? Because they discovered they had this gold, this consumer gold in the princesses, whom they had not marketed as a thing until the late 1990s. And suddenly every Disney story that centered on a girl, that girl was a princess, and she had a dress, she had a different color, there was this, and the princesses became a new, major thing to market. And then all the movies centered on girls, almost all. And then when they started
Girls
making
without
movies
romantic
about
interests.
very important, right? Sisters, not princes, right? It's all about sisterhood and other girls. And then came the fact that they started making movies about teenage boys who were gay. Two of them, specifically: Strange World, which is a cartoon made by Disney, and Elio, which was made by Pixar. And the intent in Elio, which they then pulled back from, was to make Elio an 11-year-old gay kid. Strange World was a huge flop, in which it was clear, apparently, that the central character had homosexual tendencies. And Elio. Now, what do we know? We know that 3% of Americans now, according to all the polling, identify as gay. So they are basically saying, if we're going to portray boys, we're going to portray them as gay, or these movies and TV shows are going to be about girls. All the Marvel shows on Disney Plus were about girls. It was amazing. Comic books, right? She-Hulk, Hawkeye with the girl Hawkeye, Ironheart, Echo. These are comic book shows. Do girls read comic books? They may read graphic novels. They don't read Marvel comics. So Disney had taken this crazy turn into they sort of redefined wokeness in a weird way, or defined cultural wokeness, by turning their back on half the population.
Well, and that's how you get to Trump. I mean, you get this huge backlash, and you get the bro podcasters, and you get in the most extreme form, you get Andrew Tate. And so this is the field of the culture war. And I agree with, I'm not sure whether the move to redesign the Cracker Barrel logo and restaurant was a culture war move explicitly, or whether it was just a bullheaded capitalist move, kind of, in the way that, well, let's just update things, which for no reason.
Give it a refresh.
But in a weird way,
that's what people say. We need to give our logo a refresh. Yeah. And then you get this logo. It doesn't matter where you are. It's always like, what do you do? Why does everything look like a sun now? But everything has little beams.
But it's also about class, because there's a huge disconnect between the corporate culture that makes those let's refresh things decisions and the people who actually go to Cracker Barrel.
Well, that's a great point. And I also think it's related to your point earlier about kids. I think so many of the people making these decisions either don't have kids, or their kids are grown and they haven't had young kids for a long time. And so the idea that, you need to create an environment where small children will have plenty of distractions, that's just foreign to many of the people who make these sort of bureaucratic or corporate level decisions. And so it's not only class, it's about young families. And it's becoming, I think it's going to become a bigger problem as we have fewer children in the United States. It could be having an environment that is made for little children. One is wonderful on its own, but two, also, I think, makes people more comfortable with the idea of having children. And this kind of feeds back on itself in a negative loop, which is distressing.
A culture that is limiting, like self-limiting. Yeah. So that there's all sorts of things in the public square that, if you were focused on children, at least, or you had some focus on children, it would be universally understood that you don't want these things in the public square, not even because you oppose them or but because they're too little to understand, or they're too little to have to, have this shoved in their faces. And you want them to be well behaved, and you want them to function in society and have rule, and a society in which, a libertine society in which there are no rules is also a society in which little children run amok and annoy people as they're running amok, right? I mean, they sort of, everybody gets to have full personal expression, including if you're 3 years old, and then everybody else is like, I want a restaurant where they don't let children in because I can't
there's
take it. They're
also
screaming and they're
the
crying.
the feminist movement really failed here too in an earlier culture war, when they had I think a thoughtful, a little extreme at times, but a thoughtful critique of the hypersexualization of childhood and some of the things that were being marketed to children that were inappropriate, all in the name of sort of more individual liberation. But they completely ceded that ground when the trans movement came in and was like, everybody has to be loud and proud about who they are identity wise, and you must endorse that publicly. They just stopped talking about all of that. And that's, I think, why drag queen story hour and all these other little blips in the culture war became a big deal and shocked a lot of people when they did, because you had a lot of parents over several generations saying, we do want to protect our kids from stuff that we can't explain to them yet because their brains literally aren't developed well enough emotionally or intellectually to understand what we might want to explain to them later. And that force feeding, that inability to avoid those sorts of things, is a part of the culture war that I think remains very salient among liberals, because I still see these things surface where it's like, what, are you afraid to tell your kids all about this? What do you mean? Why would you want to ban kids from porn sites? Well, you must just want to deny them free speech. I mean, you can see this continuing to be a through line. And I think that's something that conservatives should keep their eye on religiously, because it isn't about suppressing speech and it isn't about being prudes. It's about protecting childhood, which remains the goal of any good parent.
I think this is so important, just to put underscore it. In Virginia right now, we're having a gubernatorial race. And Winsome Sears, our lieutenant governor, former Marine, Black woman, a pretty incredible character. She's running behind Abigail Spanberger, Congresswoman, former CIA employee, kind of a perfect representative of the educated class, national security adjacent. Or not even adjacent in her case. She was part of the national security community, then entering politics in order to defeat Trump, right? So you have this Spanberger, Earl Sears, and Winsome Sears is behind. She's running behind. But in Loudoun County, which is the epicenter, it seems, of Virginia cultural fights, there's yet another cause celeb about boys feeling uncomfortable with a trans student in the locker room. And the boys were suspended because they were voicing their complaints about this. And Winsome Sears has seized on this, as the media might say, to make a point about, again, kind of protecting biological spaces, biological sexual spaces, male, female, policing that distinction in public schools. And she's had a good run. I have to say, for a candidate that the political community is undervaluing right now, she's had a good run. Spanberger is doing a basement campaign. She's tweeting out things. And then, of course, we had this incident last week where a Karen, some white liberal woman, was protesting in defense of the trans student and against Earl Sears, and said, Winsome Sears, if you're not going to respect trans rights, then you can go back to having the black-only water fountain. And this atrocious statement symbolizes, I think, the mentality of the white liberals who have driven America insane.
And it speaks to the Rufo strategy, which is it's the Sears campaign with politically opportunistic impulses saw this and said, this is gold for us. This is making the point that we need to make, that we need to whipsaw the race back in the other direction. And just as Rufo says, yeah, as you say, it's like this is a feature, not a bug, that they've redesigned the Cracker Barrel logo, because we're having these high-flown conversations about what is the academy and how should we function on campuses, and what is the line between free speech and bigotry, and how does Title VI, how does enforcement of Title VI, can we do that without coming at research grants and all that. And these are important and complicated issues. And Cracker Barrel is not. It's neither important or you could say it's not complicated, but it's maybe culturally important because it is a way into people's populist consciousnesses. They're not going to understand the fight over Title VI, but they can understand that they're coming after your Cracker Barrel. And I'm sorry, like, I don't like it, but I understand it. And just like I was allergic to Trumpism in 2015 and 2016, because it's not my cultural valence, doesn't mean it wasn't effective, and doesn't mean it's not effective now. But now we can move to Trumpism in another realm and talk about what exactly is going on. So Trump has had a good run in the last month on certain matters. I would say particularly, again, opportunistically, the move on the DC crime problem is going to pay off very serious political dividends and may already be paying off serious. Crime rate is down. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Like you start doing more enforcement, you put more law enforcement agents on the street, you put them very publicly so they're visible and you publicize it, crime's going to go down. So he's like, well, here we are. I'm going to get credit for it. I did it. Maybe we should go do it in Chicago. I don't know how he's going to do it in Chicago. DC has very special constitutional standing that the president has authority over, and he has no authority over local cities that are incorporated and part of states and all of that. But is that a good run?
Well, he can deploy the National Guard. That's what he's thinking of doing.
Okay, right. Okay. Then Friday morning, the FBI raids the home of my old friend, your old friend, our old friend, commentary contributor, great guy, very fond of him personally, John Bolton, raids his home and his office. He's been saying that Bolton was an idiot for 5 years. He's an idiot. He's terrible. And even here, when I heard it, my blood, my blood ran cold. Then as I read more about it, and I'd forgotten that there was this controversy over whether or not in the publication of his book in 2020, which was rushed into print in order to take advantage of the fact that Trump was running in 2020, and Bolton was going to write this negative memoir of his experience working for Trump and his life, the room where it happens, that there were real questions raised about whether or not his account necessarily compromised national security, because he knew things and had things in his, not only in his head but on paper, that were classified or worse, or a higher level of classification. And that two things about that. One, Judge Royce Lamberth, a controversial figure in DC judging, but said, well, look, 200,000 copies of the book have already been published. So following on the lines of the Pentagon Papers case, when a judge refused to sort of enjoin the publication of the Pentagon, because they'd already been published. The Washington was, the New York Times had already run the Pentagon Papers. It was like, I can't do anything about it now. And Lamberth said, well, 200,000 copies of the book have been sold. But he said, you may have done damage to national security. He said Bolton may have done damage to national security. And then this case was dropped by the Biden administration. Trump loses, case dropped by the Biden administration about the pursuit of, failure to protect classified information. So the story's more complicated. Or is it? Do we actually think that Trump cares about the release of national security, or is this just Kash Patel looking to make trouble for an enemy of Trump's? Go ahead.
A couple of news outlets have reported that this isn't actually about the book, and the memoir, that it's about new intelligence that was the CIA discovered overseas, that then they were linking back to some sort of leak or documents that only Bolton could have had. So there seems to be a lot more to this story. Potentially, we do not know, but but sounds like the Trump administration is trying to make it clear that it isn't about the memoir. It's about something else. What that is, we're not sure.
Yeah, what I find so striking about this case is that, unlike a lot of controversies, we know so little. We know so little. Most Trump controversies, the Trump administration does something, its opponents reject the thesis, you have a huge amount of reporting, and then everybody kind of goes to town and we all take our different sides and have a loud argument until the next controversy. This story is unusual to me in that very few people are talking. Bolton is not talking. Bolton's lawyer is not talking. The Justice Department has mainly communicated through leaks, background leaks that Christine mentioned, that suggest that there's something else going on here that is not completely in the book. The most high-profile comment has been Vice President Vance in an interview with Meet the Press, where he rejected political retaliation, as one might expect him to do, though he also used the plural we in opening an investigation into John Bolton, which is definitely not how one ought to talk about Justice Department investigations. So I'm kind of sitting here wondering what exactly is going on. And it may have to do with the fact that the book case was closed by the Biden administration and then may have resurfaced now with the Trump administration, if there is some type of new intelligence. I'd like to see the warrant. I'd like to see the probable cause. I'd like to have more disclosure, because until now, right at this moment, all we can surmise is that there's some type of political retaliation, as there's retaliation on a whole host of other people who may be also may have done something wrong. And these are all the mortgage cases that have surfaced, whether it's Tish James, Adam Schiff, and now Lisa Cook, the governor on the Federal Reserve, who's Trump's latest target.
So when I first heard the Bolton news, I had the same sort of immediate reaction that you had, John. I was outraged. But I have learned in the course of Trump's public life to sort of check my reflexive outrage at anything he does, because sometimes the story is more complicated and more legitimate than one first thinks. Now, I have to say, I don't think there's much to it, and I do think that this is about making Bolton's life difficult. The book was vetted by White House officials before it was published, wasn't it?
Well, there were apparently,
it's complicated.
as Andy McCarthy explains, one official who I think was outside the White House, I think at DOD, may signaled to Bolton, it's clear, but that was not the official clearance. And then a White House official later said it wasn't clear. And so,
right. It's very complicated.
Of course, the White House people were probably disinclined to approve it anyway, because they knew that it was going to be used to attack Trump in the middle of an election. And just briefly, there were many people who were allies of Bolton who thought that him rushing the book to hit the height of a presidential cycle definitely was in itself a violation of the norms concerning presidential employees, for example. Like Bob Gates waited until after Obama was still president when Bob Gates released his memoir critical of Obama, but he waited until after he had been out of office for a few years. Yeah.
I read the book, and if you remember, it's a very good book, by the way. It's a very important an original effort to explain what it's like to work in the White House and what it means to be in a senior position, which is what good books about Washington are like. And I commend it to people in that regard. And it did not have, it was not a flurry of revelations. It wasn't, Cy Hirsch making stuff up, or it wasn't whatever. That wasn't the intent or mood of it. It's just a question of whether or not the idea is that the book is informed by so much classified information that he had at his fingertips and that he knew and that he had been exposed to, that it would have been impossible for him to write the book as he wrote it without that material. Now that's a almost Talmudic interpretation problem. It's like he saw things that other people don't get to see. He wrote a book informed by them that didn't reveal those things, but the penumbras and emanations from them come out in the pages of the book. And maybe somebody at a foreign intelligence agency can piece together bits and pieces that we don't even know are there to put together a portrait of something, if it's the book. And if it's not this other question of whether or not other material has been gathered. I find that, the idea that John would somehow disseminate or release information to a foreign intelligence service is so absolutely beyond the bounds of psychosis that I can't even take that even minimally seriously. I can see how they might have discovered or uncovered the idea that intelligence agencies went through his book with, something to look at things at the molecular level in order to see if they could piece stuff together that would help explain certain types of things in American foreign policy.
Or that information was improperly handled, right? And and of course, a lot of the stories have mentioned private email accounts and sending notes back and forth. This is speculative. I'm not saying that it's been even alleged, but that, of course, recalls the Hillary Clinton email server from a decade ago. I think the important point here is it goes in line with what Abe said. As Andy McCarthy likes to say, that with lawfare, the process is the penalty. So once an investigation starts or is resumed, the subject of that investigation, even before any charges are made, as in the case of Bolton, is already paying a price because of the searches, because of having to lawyer up. And remember, Bolton has had his security that was provided by the government that was stripped away. He may have also had his security clearance stripped away, as Trump has done with many other people. So it's just hard to view this as a completely objective case. It's making it more difficult to say that this is just a objective investigation into the handling of classified material. Was Trump's truth post yesterday after watching Chris Christie on ABC News. Trump said, I'm not going to read the whole post, but I'm quoting, "Can anyone believe anything that sloppy Chris says? Do you remember the way he lied about the dangerous and deadly closure of the George Washington Bridge in order to stay out of prison, at the same time sacrificing people who worked for him, including a young mother who spent years trying to fight off the vicious charges against her? Chris refused to take responsibility for these criminal acts. For the sake of justice," all caps, "perhaps we should start looking at that very serious situation again. No one is above the law." So this post was directly in response to criticism made by Governor Christie against Trump, and it's a implication of perhaps resurrecting a case that's a decade old, in which Christie did avoid any legal penalty or repercussions, and most of the investigations surrounded his aides, who it seems were mostly responsible for the basically the partial closure of the George Washington Bridge to retaliate against a township that was not pro-Christie at the time, for those of you who've forgotten Bridgegate. So this kind of climate of of Lawfare squared is becoming more and more apparent over this summer.
Yeah, I just want to say for listeners and viewers, we lost John. He dropped out owing to technical reasons. I do think that Trump has a special animus toward John Bolton because Bolton has never come anywhere near to bending the knee to playing the game that Christie has played. So there are people who sort of come in and out of the Trump camp. They criticize and then they come in and they come out. And Bolton has argued from his principles the entire time, which is something that I think horrifies Trump. That he can't handle.
That repeated frustration you see with the retribution targets in this second Trump term, half of them seem to be the people who he feel unfairly used lawfare against him, obviously. But the other half are the mistakes he felt he made in the first term, trusting the establishment to suggest to him people like Bolton. And there's a more personal animus behind a lot of those choices, I think.
Yeah, and all of them, as we were talking about what might be the underlying matter in the Bolton investigation, or in the cases of the various Democrats who the Trump administration is saying violated basically tax law, I guess, by having different primary residences. There could be an underlying offense. Over our break, I listened to a long interview between Tyler Cowen and New York Times columnist David Brooks, and David Brooks made the point that the thing about Trump is he's never entirely wrong, and this is very true on a lot of levels. In the case of lawfare, it makes it much more difficult to stand up for the objective application of the rule of law when some of the figures he's going after may actually have done something wrong.
Yeah, I just wish he wouldn't wear the hat. The Trump, what was the hat? It says everything Trump said was.
Trump is right about everything.
Yeah,
I have to say that was the greatest moment of his presidency so far.
The new hat is he's never entirely wrong.
Right, that one would bother me less, I think.
Well, should I make a recommendation?
Yeah, why don't you go
move,
for it,
John? Okay, great. As people know, we were off last week, so it gave me plenty of time to catch up on reading, and I'll recommend one of the books I read over the break. Among my favorite authors is Donald E. Westlake, the mystery and crime writer, and I made the pledge a while back to read his Dortmunder books in order. Dortmunder is a kind of small-time crook. He has a gang. They meet at the OJ Bar and Grill, and these are comic caper novels. And perhaps the most famous is the first one, The Hot Rock, which was turned into a movie in the 70s, starring Robert Redford, who does not quite look like Dortmunder as he's described in Westlake. But the second novel, called Bank Shot, is the one that I read over the last week. It took me a couple days. It's a short, fun novel. The bank caper is that in order to steal the safe, the criminals actually have to steal the entire bank. And the bank is in a mobile trailer. And so it's just a delightful novel. It's comic. Westlake had two major characters. One was Dortmunder. He was the comic character. And then the other novels were the Parker novels, which he wrote under a pseudonym, Richard Stark. Those are the noir novels. And so I like to alternate between Parker and Dortmunder. And so I had my Dortmunder, and now I'll be turning to the next in the Parker series. Bank Shot by Donald E. Westlake.
All right. Sounds good. If John were here, he would discuss his experience with these novels. But
what he would do is he'd say, well, Matt, that's what you like. And instead, I like Ed McBain and the 87th Precinct novels. And then he would go on and talk about them for 3 or 4 minutes.
There you go. Well, that does it for Matt, Christine, and the vanished John.
The disappeared John von Orts.
This is Abe saying keep the candle burning.